Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 2D Twin Stick Top Down Shooter. My name is Casanis. Guys, in the last episode, we took a look at feedback, we took a look at player taking damage and giving out damage and seeing that damage happen. In this episode, we're going to take a look at something that one of my students asked me about, and that is the ability to switch out weapons. All right, let's get started. Okay, guys, so this episode is not an inventory episode. We're not going to learn how to make an inventory system or anything like that. We're just going to look at the ability to switch out weapons, and it's something you already can do. Based on the stuff you've already been given, this is something that we can already do. So let's take a look at the little goblin that I built. If I hit play here, we'll see that this goblin will swap out and they will change how they look. In this particular case, it came in with a sword and hair. If I do it again, then this time it came in with an axe and a shield and a helmet and etc. etc. It's still got the bikini. Let's check the next one. That bikini armor, the ridiculous fantasy bikini armor. And here we go, a little character with a dagger. Okay, so I've treated this in exactly the same way that I treated the player character. I set up a randomization to occur. So let's just take a look at that really quickly before we go on to the idea of the ability to switch weapons, because this is part of it right here. The randomized basic enemy, if all the enemies are kind of set up the same way, then this will just be used for all of them. I may have to set it up differently for each one. I'm not really sure yet, depending on how all the other enemies look. But that said, in exactly the same way I did with the character, with the player, I went through and I made a bunch of public things. The number of faces that are associated with it. I have a reference to the sprite for the character's head or for the enemy's head. Whether or not they can have a shield and what that shield is, their hair, if they have hair or not, whether or not they have the bikini armor on, whether or not they have additional clothing of some kind. This available weapons is what we're going to take a look at in just a moment. This is how we switch out our weapons, as is this here, and the actual weapon for the sprite. Okay, so, and then I actually have a reference here to the enemy combat system so we can swap our weapons out. But for the most part, all we do on the start is we go in and we randomize certain things. So here let's skip this part for now because that's the actual weapon. We choose a image for the head, that's a sprite for a head. We check to see if we can actually have a shield, and if we can, then we either turn it on or turn off, 50% chance of having a shield or not. This doesn't do anything right now, but later on, if I decide that the shield means you have an extra 10 hit points or whatever, then I can make the adjustments here as well. I randomize whether or not they have hair or whether or not they're wearing the bikini armor, and I randomize the color of their extra clothing. That's just their little bikini armor or their loincloth. Now, that's all we have to do to randomize it. But what we're interested in now is the ability to turn on or turn off certain weapons, and what happens if we change out those weapons. You'll note that I have right here something called a Goblin Weapon SO, and that's a scriptable object. So exactly like we did scriptable objects before for the player classes, I actually did scriptable objects for the weapons as well. I'm sorry if I'm talking funny. I made the mistake of eating an entire bag of Sour Kids before trying to record this. Now I have that weird feeling in my mouth. I apologize if I sound funny. Anyway, guys, the Goblin Weapon scriptable object, so Goblin Weapon SO, and it's not necessary to name it SO, I just did so, is right here. And I built it exactly the same way that I built the one for the player classes. I come in with this initial line of code here, and this will set it up so that I can see I can have the ability within the menu, within Unity's menu, to actually build objects inside of the scriptable object itself. So here we go. I'm saying this is a scriptable object. That's where it inherits from. I have created a number of public variables. I've created a Boolean on whether or not you can have a weapon with a shield. And this is for the different weapons. The actual weapon sprite. So what does the weapon look like? The rate of fire, the sounds the weapon makes, the projectile it produces, and the radius of the damage, because obviously the radius of the damage might change. If we want a ranged enemy, we're going to have to be able to have it set up so that they attack farther away. Okay, so once we've built this, we can go through and create a bunch of different ones. So let me move this out of the way. And let's take a look. So if I come in here to my scriptable objects, so right here are goblin weapons, you can see I have a number of goblin weapons that are associated with that I've already created. So if I wanted to create another one, I can right click, I can say create, and you can see right here, because of that line of code that I've added, I can click enemy weapon, and suddenly we have a new, let's say, boomerang. Is that how you spell boomerang? Anyway, we have ourselves a brand new boomerang. But we don't need that, so let's get rid of it for now. Yes, delete it, I'm sure. Okay, so you can see here that I've created a number of different scriptable objects. I have an axe, I have a bow, I have a dagger, I have a great sword, a mace, and a sword. So each of these things here, I just went through and I filled out the different values. I put in the image. For now, a lot of these are using the same projectile. So for example, the axe and the dagger are using the same projectile. I haven't actually changed the damage values or anything like that. So all the weapons kind of do the same thing. They all have the same projectile. Obviously, if I wanted to, I'd have to go into my projectiles here. Yeah, into my enemy projectiles here, and I have to create a bunch of different ones. So if I, wanted the axe to do different and have a different swing, I'd create a different projectile. The only one that I created was this arrow, so the arrow is slightly different, but that's it. Okay, so let's drag the code back here for a second and take a look at what we had to do in order to allow for this stuff to be used inside of the game. So, like I said, you already know how to make these changeable assets. You already know how to do that. We've created ourselves a bunch of scriptable objects based on the scriptable object we've created right here. And afterwards, inside of our randomized basic enemy, I load in all of the scriptable objects I have. So I have an array of all the scriptable objects. And down here within the randomization, I say my weapon, which is going to be the one that they're going to use, is equal to, and I just choose randomly one of the available weapons. And that's it. And then I go through and I set up everything appropriately. So I set up my weapon sprite, which I've declared up here. I set up my weapon sprite to be the image from the weapon, from that particular scriptable object. If I scrub down, I check to see, okay, if my weapon's allowed to have a shield, well, then I have a chance of using it. I check to see where else? What else do I check? That's it. That's all I check. However, what is important is this right here. This line of code looks for the enemy controller, the enemy combat system, excuse me, that is associated with the enemy that we already created. So all of our enemies have that enemy combat system. We already knew that. We did that a few episodes ago where we set it up, and that's how the enemy shoots and aims and everything else. So inside of the enemy combat system, I had to set up something that would allow me to set the weapon. So let's go over to our enemy combat system. Let's go find that public function that is down here. And it's really, really simple. Simple weapon switching right here. I call this set weapon. I give it the appropriate goblin weapon scriptable object. And I simply change things like the rate of fire, the damage radius, the projectile it's using, and the weapon sounds. And that's it. You could use something like this every time. Let's say you're setting this up for your character, so it's not just about the enemies. You want your characters to be able to swap out weapons. Well, you'd go through it exactly the same way. You'd set up a scriptable object for the player's weapons. You would set up a number of those objects, so you had a bunch of different weapons, and you'd set up a pickup. So if I run over the two-handed sword, well, I would call this public function and make changes to my combat system. Or if I want my enemies to have different ones, like I do here, I simply assign one of them and I change the values in the enemy combat system. That's it. That's how easy it is to change weapons. If I wanted to, if I had two different, I could set up so I each have two different weapons and I just swap out the current weapon. Let's say that every single one of my enemies had the ability to do both ranged and melee combat. Well, then I would set up two different weapons up here, one for ranged, one for melee. All the values for that scriptable object be available. I could either put it in an array or separate ones. It doesn't really matter. And then all I'd have to do is whenever I wanted them to switch weapons, let's say you got too close and I wanted my enemies to move to their melee weapons, all I'd have to do is call a function like this, set weapon, and I'd have it set the values for that particular weapon. That's it. That's how easy it is to make weapons that you can switch around. There's no need for a large system where we're worried about these different weapons that we have or anything like that. Something like this is really easy to do. Scriptable objects makes this kind of thing really, really easy to do. All right, everyone, that's it. That's it. That's all I wanted to show you today. So this is a nice short video. That's great. If we hit play here, we're going to see we get ourselves a brand new enemy each time and a brand new weapon too. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys liked this. I hope it was really useful to you. You could extend this if you wanted to build an inventory system. Swap out weapons, pickups, anything you really want to do for either the player or your enemies. It's up to you. All right, guys, I'm looking forward to seeing what you built. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, let me know down below with a thumbs up. And if you didn't, a thumbs down is perfectly fine. I'm still pretty rusty at this, and I made the mistake today of eating a bunch of candy before I started recording. And I'm sure that this is going to sound horrible on the mic because my mouth is dry. I feel really bad. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, thumbs up. If you didn't, thumbs down. That's perfectly fine. All right, everyone. Thumbs up, thumbs down, comments down below, and if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.